I actually say to my husband sometimes, there's no welfare system here. We are the welfare system,
Hmm.
like giving to beggars or giving to those in need. If
Yeah.
my husband says, Margot, haven't you helped enough? Haven't you given to enough beggars today? I will say, well, there's no welfare system. We're it.
Yeah.
We're the welfare system. And that I have that same sense of absolutely just responsibility.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gret Glyer podcast. I've got Margot Biggs with me here today, and she has an incredible story. She's currently in Liberia in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and she's a nurse. Her husband's a pilot, and you can find her on DonorSee at donorsee.com/a-pilot-and-a-nurse. So, Margot, thanks for being here. I would love for you to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you for having me. So like you said, I'm a nurse. I come from Australia. I've been in Liberia since June last year, so we're just coming up to our first year here. And I've certainly been on a massive discovery experience since being in Liberia. I've never lived in Africa before. So I've been volunteering at a mission hospital here. And I've totally had my eyes open to how different life is in third world countries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been quite a learning curve for me coming from Western medicine to developing country medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what was your life like before? Where did you live? What was kind of the amenities that you had, and then how did that change when you moved to Liberia?
So we lived in Brisbane, which is in Queensland, Australia, and we lived a very comfortable life. My husband is a pilot, but he was in the police service in Australia for the last 10 years. I was working as a nurse in the emergency department of an Australian hospital for the last 10 years. And we had a good income, we had a nice house, a nice car, really lots of freedom to do things that we wanted to do. But we have always had a really strong heart for missions. And we were actually on the mission field from 2000 to 2004 with MAF. We came back to Brisbane to basically put our kids through school. So we've very much been chafing at the bit to get back on the mission field. We really, as much as we had a very nice, easy life in Australia, our hearts are in missions. So coming to Liberia, I don't know if you can get a bigger change. We certainly did have massive culture shock, and it was certainly a difficult move to pick up and leave everything, just to leave everything behind that way. Living here, we are on a compound, so we're quite well looked after. Our house is quite acceptable. We've got everything we need, certainly. But life is certainly very different. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. So, it's a big decision to not only move overseas, but bring your family overseas. So what was it that there's a lot of other people who are still in Australia who didn't move to a developing country. What was it that provoked you was there a moment that you said, okay, we know that this is what we have to do now?
I don't know if there was one moment. I think the thing with us is that our faith is very strong in our lives, and we have always felt very much called to Africa. And right from sort of even in our early married years, we definitely felt called to missions, and always had a real heart for the African continent. No particular country, just somewhere in Africa.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is too, we're both very, really want to make our lives count sort of people. I don't want to get to the end of my life and go, well, I worked in an Aussie hospital and that was great and I helped some people. I want to get to the end of my life and say, wow, I helped a lot of people in a third world country. It is actually very fulfilling, much more fulfilling work here, as much as the lifestyle is a lot harder. Much more fulfilling. And I think for us, it was a no-brainer because we knew that we were called, and so there was no way we would do anything else.
Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned it's been a very interesting year being abroad and getting exposure to the culture shock. What have been some of the challenges to this time that you've been abroad?
All right. So probably two big challenges. One is the language for us because here they don't speak well. They do speak another language, but it's called Liberian English and it is a form of English.
Hmm.
So you can't really just get language lessons, come learn the language and then start working. It's something that you kind of have to just try and pick up. And so I have found that very challenging because a lot of the time, it doesn't sound anything like English to me. So you can pick up words here and there, but I found that quite frustrating and at times very stressful. The other thing is trying to adjust to being basically a rich person in a poor country.
Yeah.
Like in Australia, I wasn't thought of as a very wealthy person, but here I am. And it's actually, we've both found it particularly challenging to live our normal lives, having 3 meals a day, shelter, warmth when we need it, everything we need, while so many around us don't have any of that.
Hmm.
So that's been one of our biggest, you get this feeling of guilt
Yeah.
and you you kind of feel guilty because you have everything you need and it makes you want to give and try and give money or give time or give possessions, but I could give away everything I own and every cent and still it wouldn't be a drop in the ocean to
Yeah.
fix the poverty situation here.
Hmm.
So that we've had to come to a place where we can live what we consider a normal life. We come from Australia and for us there's something we call normal. So we're not going to live like, so to speak, like the natives. But
Hmm.
coming to terms with that feeling of guilt almost has
Hmm.
been difficult, and it's something that still comes and goes, and we just deal with it as it comes.
Now, was it actually living overseas that started to provoke some of these feelings, or did you have a sense that you were better off even before you got to Liberia?
It was living overseas. I think. I mean, I definitely always knew I was better off,
Hmm.
far better off. But until it's right in your face, you don't necessarily realize that feeling of almost guilt. So when you're stuck at a quite a nice house with everything you need in the middle of this massive sort of city full of absolute poverty, I
Hmm.
think that's when we most had to deal with it. It's just a feeling of unfairness and wow, I feel so blessed just because I was born in Australia.
Yeah.
I'm an Australian citizen, therefore I have enough money to feed me every day and to provide all my needs. So living amongst it was definitely far more confronting
Hmm.
than just being back in Australia knowing that I was better off.
Yeah, it'd be, I don't know if ignore is the right word, but it'd be easier to kind of put away those thoughts, because
Exactly.
you don't have someone living in destitute poverty, living and breathing right in front of you, and then all of a sudden you do, and
Yep.
you have no choice but to face some of that.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So how have you? I think this would be very interesting. I know a lot of our audience has never been overseas, but they think about these questions a lot, and they don't want to be blind to how the rest of the world is, but they also want a better understanding for themselves. They want better perspective for themselves. They want to understand how much of a blessing it is to grow up in Australia or America or
Yeah.
UK or wherever it is. um, so for you, what were some of the experiences that you had in Liberia that really helped you understand the disparity between where you came from and where you are now? What was there? Did you ever have a moment where you talked to where you were faced with a particular story, or you met someone?
Yeah. I've had actually many of those moments. I think in my first weeks and maybe a couple of months here, what I noticed most was the beggars on the streets.
Yeah.
It's not something we see in Australia, especially those that are disabled. That's just so heart wrenching. And it would be quite hard for me to not just go and empty out my purse of all my money, because I felt like, oh my goodness, there's no welfare system here.
Yeah.
So the beggars on the streets. I think recently I had an experience which left me so. shell-shocked almost. There is a man that lives in the community. He's homeless and he's got mental health issues. And we see him wandering around. He's sometimes half clothed, sometimes he's naked. I don't know. He's very unkempt and disheveled. I don't know how he survives. And I tried to help him recently by just getting him some clothes and some water and food. But I sat there with him thinking, I've done this much. I've clothed him, but there is literally no more options now. There's no mental health hospital. There's no homeless shelters. There are a couple of rehab hospitals that I phoned. One of them was full. One of them was not taking patients because of corona. And that really made me realize, you know what, in Australia, there would be somewhere I could take that man.
Yeah.
A government organization or a charity, there would be somewhere. But I literally had to leave him on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so heartbreaking and really showed me, wow, this place, I mean, it's worlds apart from my home in Australia.
You know, it's interesting that you put it that way. One of the ways I've tried to explain the disparity to my friends here in America is I've tried to say, you know, if someone's in trouble, if someone, you know, is homeless or something like that, often they have their choice of like 20 different homeless shelters that they could go to. I mean, obviously, if they're homeless, they have other deeper problems. Mental health is one of those.
Yes.
And you never know like what exactly was the situation that provoked them getting where they are. But yeah, the thing about these countries or about certain places in the world is that there is no like social safety net. There's nothing for the
That's right.
poorest people. They have nothing, and it really perpetuates when people talk about the poverty cycle. There's nothing that keeps people in the poverty cycle like just like having so little. And yeah,
Exactly.
so it's interesting that you and your husband have been going through that. When you and your husband talk about these issues, I mean, how do you wrestle with it? It's a challenging thing that everyone who's been in your position has to go through. So I'm sure our audience would love to know, how do you personally, when you're dialoguing with him, like what does that conversation look like?
Yeah. Well, I think what's really helped us deal with this issue, and it's a bit of a cliche, but it's that we're blessed to be a blessing. I
Hmm.
think I've often said to God and my husband, you know, how come I'm so lucky? How come I have everything and these people don't? What's different? And I can't really answer that question, but the fact that I really do have so much, I help myself deal with that by knowing that I will use what I have to bless others.
Hmm.
And so any little things I can do or give or help, that's what I'm here for. I also do use the starfish story. You know, there's that story of the boy throwing thousands of starfish on the beach, and there's a boy throwing them back, and a man comes along and says, why are you bothering? You're never going to get all these starfish back in the sea. It's not going to make any difference. And the boy holds up one starfish and says, well, it will make a difference to this one.
Hmm.
So that story is very close to my heart because I see so much
Hmm.
suffering and pain around me, and I can't help
Yeah.
everyone. So I guess, yeah, my husband and I, we help those that are in front of us if we can,
Hmm.
and just do what we can when we can.
Yeah. I think that's very admirable, and I've kind of come to the same conclusion as you. It's just difficult. It's just challenging to see
Mm.
all of the need in the world, and it can feel at times it can feel hopeless and despairing,
Yeah.
and you know you don't want that, but at the same time there's a lot that you can do. And I think like especially
Mm.
when you compare yourself, you know, you as a nurse in Australia versus you as a nurse in Liberia, I'm sure it's
Yes.
like in 1 week in Liberia you're already doing more than a much more
Absolutely.
substantial amount of time in Australia, just because, and there's something very fulfilling about that, and you feel like you're being useful,
Mm.
and you're really helping people's lives change in a tangible way. And yeah, and I also kind of in the same vein as you, I also feel like a deep responsibility. Like
Yes.
I've been given a lot. I have a nice place. I live with my wife here in Falls Church, Virginia.
Yeah.
Um, and we're about to move to Springfield, and I just feel very blessed, and that's really lucky. But I feel like because of the blessing, then it's like, well, then that's like all the more responsibility to
Yes,
serve others even more so.
that
Um,
is true.
yeah. So
Yeah.
anyways, I just
That
really think
I
that,
often,
please.
sorry, I actually say to my husband sometimes, there's no welfare system here. We are the welfare system,
Hmm.
like giving to beggars or giving to those in need. If
Yeah.
my husband says, Margot, haven't you helped enough? Haven't you given to enough beggars today? I will say, well, there's no welfare system. We're it.
Yeah.
We're the welfare system. And that I have that same sense of absolutely just responsibility. Yeah.
I would love for you to, well, a lot of the people who are watching this are going to be either your donors or donor-see donors. I would love for you to talk about some of the work that you're doing on the ground in Liberia as a nurse, and also maybe that your family's doing. I think it'd be interesting to hear what your husband as a pilot is doing and all that stuff. So yeah, please tell us more about that.
Okay, so there is a mission hospital right here on my compound, which is actually very convenient for me.
Hmm.
So since I've got here, I've just been volunteering there, and I've done all sorts of different things there. I don't have a set role. I'm very passionate about training and education and mentoring, and I think that's a good thing for me to be doing because I'm the one with the very good education and experience. And the Liberian nurses, they don't get an education anything like we're blessed to be able to get in a Western country. So I love to do training, education, mentoring. My background being in emergency, I've spent quite a bit of time in the emergency room at the hospital. I've helped them set up like a proper triage system, and I've tried to be mentoring nurses there. Since our corona pandemic started, I've been very much involved with triaging at basically the front gate of the hospital so that we can direct people this way or that way, depending
Hmm.
on if they have respiratory symptoms. So in some ways it's nice. I can set my own hours, and I'm a volunteer, although some weeks I'm very busy, other weeks it's quieter.
Yeah.
Um, in the course of my work at the hospital, I get to see people's stories much more closely. Oh, I've also helped out. We have a malnutrition under 5-year-old clinic. I've done quite a bit of help in that clinic, which I love because I love babies.
Hmm.
Um, and through interacting with people at the hospital, that's when I come across these heartbreaking stories.
Yeah.
Just really, some of them so hard to deal with. And once again, just highlighting the fact that they have so little here compared to what we would have in Australia or a Western country. Um, so I have been on the Corona Task Force group. So we've set up all sorts of new initiatives at the hospital,
Yeah.
and we're doing our very best with what we've got to make the best of the situation. My husband is um, so there's no domestic airline in Liberia.
Mm.
MAF is it, basically. Mission Aviation Fellowship is who we're actually here serving with.
Yeah.
So he does, his work actually is probably just as life-saving as mine, because they do a lot of medivacs and ferrying doctors and nurses and health workers and all sorts of people all over the country.
Mm.
So at the moment, they're not doing a lot of flying because of travel restrictions. But what MAF are doing here is just so vital.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe. I think if MAF suddenly disappeared from the country, it would leave a really big hole. It would be a really
Hmm.
big loss. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I would really love to hear more about this, about what you're doing with COVID-19 specifically. It sounds like you've set up this interesting triage method right at the gate. So what is that,
Yep.
like tangibly, what does that look like? What are the details? Like someone
All
pulls
right.
up and I assume someone goes up to their window, and then what happens after that?
Yes. So we have a counter. Someone we've set out. We've painted little blobs on the floor so we can keep people socially distant.
Hmm.
Although we do our best. Sometimes it's
Right.
like herding cats, I think.
Hmm.
So a person will present to the desk. We have a standard triage form that we use, and the first 4 things on that form are: do you have fever, cough, runny nose, or difficulty in breathing? So if they have any of those things, even if it's related to another condition or they've just genuinely got a cold, they still will go to our respiratory screening area, because if there's any chance that they might have the virus, we need to keep them separated from everyone else. We give them a mask, we take them to a tent that we've got set up on a grassy area, and we have a physician there who will screen them, decide whether or not they actually do need testing for coronavirus or whether it's really quite obviously something else. But the front gate where our little counter is a very busy area, so we can't do that thorough screening right there at the gate. So we just work out what symptoms they've got. If they've got those respiratory symptoms, we have someone, just a runner, who will take them to our respiratory tent for screening. If they don't have those symptoms, then they'll just be directed into the hospital to whatever they came for.
Gotcha. And so have you guys have plenty of tests? Are you getting a lot of COVID-19 patients? How has that impacted your operation so far?
Yeah, well, it's been different to what I expected. So the problem with something like this in Liberia is that the people are absolutely terrified. So Liberia was ground zero for Ebola, and that was only 5 years ago. And I really think that the whole country, really as a whole, has got a severe case of PTSD from Ebola. So anything like this that comes around, it's a pandemic, some people do die from it, they are terrified. And all they can remember in the back of their minds is that when Ebola was here, someone got diagnosed with Ebola, they were taken off and you kind of never saw them again.
Yeah.
So as much as corona is very different to Ebola, it's hard to get them to really understand that this is actually not so bad. In fact, it's quite a lot better than Ebola.
Yeah.
So initially our numbers went way down at the hospital because everyone was too scared to leave their homes, and they didn't want to come to the hospital because we might test them, and if they tested positive, we might put them in jail somewhere and they would never see their families again. There have been stories of people that have tested positive, and in the early days their names were published and they were thrown out of their communities because of fear.
Yeah.
So initially our numbers went down. They're actually starting to come up again now. But even still, I will find that if someone admits that they've got a cough or a runny nose, and I will say to them, oh, okay, we're going to take you to our respiratory doctor just for screening, you can see their eyes fill with fear, and they will say, oh no, I don't have a cough.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And then there'll be a little mini argument, and some of them just run off, actually.
Yeah.
Which is really hard for us, so frustrating, because actually all we want to do is help them and care for them, and they just don't have the understanding of what we're trying to do. Some of them, and others do understand.
Yeah, that sounds really complicated. For the people who do get tested positive and then they stay with you, what kind of treatments are you providing for them? I don't know how much of a ventilator stock you have. I'm sure it's very, very limited, if anything. So yeah, what does the treatment look like?
So we certainly don't have the treatment that a Western country would have, but we have got treatment that can save lives. So one good thing about our hospital is that we have oxygen. So in fact, not many other hospitals have oxygen. At one point, one other hospital did borrow some oxygen from us, but we recently got an oxygen plant built at our hospital. So that's just perfect timing for that to be in place, because that's one of the biggest things you need for corona. So we don't really have ventilators. We do actually have ventilators in our OR, but they are for the OR. So we don't have an ICU. We don't have ventilated patients. If someone were to need ventilation, we would simply give them oxygen and do our best.
Yeah.
Consequently, in a country like this, there will be more people that could die because we don't have all the modern medical things.
Yeah.
We've got medications, we've got oxygen, we've converted a whole ward into a respiratory ward. We call it the respiratory ward because it's too scary to call it the corona ward.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have doctors and nurses who will staff that ward. Although even that's been difficult because the health staff are scared too.
Yeah.
I think the expats understand it better, and we don't have this whole sort of Ebola PTSD thing happening. So the Liberian staff are more scared, I think, in many cases. So that's been a little bit difficult even to find the staff. But we do have the staff. We are providing good care for the patients, and we've got, for the moment, we've got enough PPE. We just don't know how long it will last. So I think we're managing quite well with what we've got.
That's great.
And definitely saving lives, which is, of course, our goal.
Mm-hmm. So before we close out, I want to know, what are your, I think it's still in the early days of COVID-19 for Liberia, especially because it's just taking longer to get to places like Africa because there's less travel. So
that's right. Yeah.
What do you have concerns about where things are going? Do you think that you're pretty well prepared? Where are some of the, what are some of your thoughts in regards to that?
I do have concerns, but it's very unknown because the numbers in Africa in general seem to have been lower, with probably the exception of South Africa, there's a lot more travel. And it's so hard to know how this will go. Are we kind of in the calm before the storm, or is it actually not going to be too bad here? I think we've done a really good job of preparing with what we've got. We've got our tent set up, our ward set up. And if we do end up getting inundated, we'll simply do what we always do, which is we'll continue to carry on and do our best and save as many as we can. So yeah, I do have concerns, but as each week goes by and we don't see massive numbers here, I've become more and more hopeful that maybe it won't be so bad here. A lot of my concerns relate to the fact that although we in Liberia is a very young population, I think average age of death is 52. The problem is that there are a lot of people living with comorbidities. So the HIV rate is higher. Just of course, malaria everyone's got. Any other illnesses that people have can predispose you to getting a worse dose of corona. Your immunosuppression, that sort of thing. So that has been our concern largely, the fact that a lot of the population is a bit immunosuppressed. But we soldier on and do what we can and hope for the best.
Yeah, well, that's very admirable. Do you think that you and your husband will stay in Liberia for the foreseeable future, like through this pandemic?
Yes, we definitely plan on staying. I think when it all kicked off a month or two ago, a lot of people have left, certainly, understandably, especially if they're vulnerable health-wise. I said to my husband, I will not leave unless MAF tells me I have to leave, and they will drag me out kicking and screaming. Because I would feel like I was deserting a sinking ship, to be honest. I really do think I'm here for such a time as this, and the benefit I currently am to the hospital is a good thing. So I would not choose to leave, but I will certainly go if I have to. If I'm told to go, I will. But at this point, it's looking like, hopefully we can see it through here.
Well, that's really admirable that you're not only there, but you're fighting alongside everyone else during this pretty uncertain time. And I just hope that you and all of the other doctors and nurses and staff at ELWA get all the support that you need.
Thank you.
So yeah, I hope everyone checks out donorc.com/apilotandthenurse. And everyone really should check out Margot's projects. Your heart comes through. You're so your passion comes through, and I've seen projects where you just get very emotional and almost like choked up because of some of the types of needs that are going on. So we're thrilled to have you as a DonorSee partner, Margot, and I'm just personally really impressed with what you're doing and your attitude amidst a very difficult situation. There's a lot of people reacting, understandably, it's a frantic time for a lot of people, and it's a concerning time. And when I talk to you, I just feel this deep sense of hope and joy amongst a really difficult situation. And I hope that our audience feels the same thing. I know that they will. So Margot, thank you very much. Before we close out, I'd love for you to kind of, if you have another 30 seconds to 2 minutes of just anything you want to say to our audience, what would you say to people listening back at home who are not in Liberia? They can't see the things that you're seeing on the ground. What would you say to them?
I think what I would say is, if you could see what I see with my eyes, you would probably behave differently with the resources that you have. I think I consider myself a generous, giving person, but until I came here, I never gave as much as I totally could have, but until you see it with your own eyes and realize the desperation, it changes you. And so I guess I wish that I could somehow convey to people the immensity of the suffering here. Honestly, I had no idea. People in Western countries have no idea how hard life is for people who live in poverty. It is, in some cases, abject misery. And half the world has no idea. And yet there is so much we could be doing. And I am so grateful to the donors that have given to my projects. It has, to an extent, restored my faith in humanity to see that there are people who care, that are willing to give and willing to help. That is, for someone like me who's living in the middle of it, well, thank goodness for people like you that are willing to give.
Margot, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. I hope that that message gets spread far and wide. And we're thrilled to have you on the podcast. We're thrilled to have you on DonorSee. And yeah, we're just rooting for you in this difficult time.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Margot.
Thank you. Bye.